What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. A little bit of a different one today, but those of you that have been around the channel for a while will know what a huge fan I am of the original speedrun pyro build for vanilla Outriders. It is a playstyle that I definitely love with the Pyromancer, and it was pretty much the only way that I played the game for months on end, I would say, because of the blisteringly fast clears that you can do and the general ease of doing expeditions as you're playing solo that this build basically brought for you. Now, ever since the release of Worldslayer, I've wanted to recreate this build in the game's current economy and essentially see what 5 additional mods on the armor would do for it and if it would still perform as well as it did in the past. Certainly the game has changed a lot and we've seen some nerfs to some of the things which made speedrun pyro as good as it was, and of course there's a big difference between APOC 40 and CT15, but another fun experiment that I wanted to attempt on my way to doing that was to actually take the old purple speedrun pyro gear with 2 mods per gear that I used back in vanilla and level that up once I got to 40, to level that up to 40 and see how that performed at max level. The footage that you're seeing in the background here is me actually doing that, and the results were pretty damn impressive. Whether that's due to the innate strength of this build and just the fact that it was so incredibly overtuned to begin with and just a real degenerate powerhouse for the Pyromancer, this still does very well, does really good clears, especially considering that we now have much higher health pools and we have some nerfs to, for instance, reload boost, which was the main reason why this build performed so well. It is actually quite impressive to see that it can still post these kinds of clears, these kinds of speeds, and it still plays so well. That gives me hope that once we do see the actual Apocalypse version of this build, that it would actually also stand up compared to the original, maybe not being as good as the original, maybe being even more niche in a way, specifically just for doing expedition content, because of course I did try this against the Arbiter, and while I didn't have a problem staying alive, it took forever to kill him. So that's just unfortunate. I think that is a downside to this. This will forever be, at least for me, a build that I would only use in expeditions, but it is a good thing to see my old favorite come back, and it actually makes me feel really good to know that this build is actually still viable, even though it is only to a certain degree in the way that the game is played right now. Going over actually how the build is made up and what I'm using that you're seeing in the footage in the background there is I cheated a little bit. Of course, I'm not using the same weapons as I used before. These I actually deleted over time. I should have kept them as well to keep the experiment as clean as possible, but in the end I ended up opting for the same type of weapons though. So we are still using a funeral pyre. This funeral pyre has Shadow Comet and Claymore Taunt on it, but then also Weakness Trap, which is probably the best version of this kind of weapon that you can get. And then specifically I'm also using the Anemoy, and the Anemoy just combining all 3 reload mechanics into one, instead of having, you know, it split half over your secondary and half over the pistol like it used to be in the original build. So we have Moaning Winds, Clip Combustion, and Radiation Splash on it. So that's a general, you know, that's the representation of the 2 weapons on there, and that's factually the only difference compared to gear wise compared to what we had in the original. Now when it comes to the gear, I'll just quickly go through this, but any of you that are familiar with this archetype or essentially how speedrun pyro work, there shouldn't be any, you know, how can I say, surprise to you. So of course we aren't using any set items. We are using 5 purple pieces who all have anomaly power on them, status power on them, and cooldown reduction on them. That's the optimum setup for this particular kind of build, because you want really fast cooldowns, and the status power itself also helps your ashen boost keep things ashed for much longer, which means that your overhits can hit for a lot harder as well. Now we have detonator and ashen boost on here, specifically to, you know, obviously lower the cooldown of overheat and to give us more damage against enemies that are ashed. We have reload boost on here, which is where a lot of the damage of this build is coming from, because as soon as you activate volcanic rounds and then swap out from that, you get this powerful 25% anomaly damage bonus that hovers over it. Now this is the area where the build took the biggest nerf from back in the day. This of course used to be twice as much as this, so it was a lot more powerful, and this is predominantly, I would say, probably the reason why this doesn't perform as strong as it used to. We also have Death Sentence on here, which just magnifies the damage from weapons and anomaly on enemies that are affected by Ash Blast by 40% and 30% respectively. Then we have empowerment on here, which means that your Ash Blast actually deals a little bit of, or quite a bit of damage when it pushes out. We have master consumer, which means that overheat can consume both things that are burning and things that are ashen, and if it consumes both of those, then you actually get a much more powerful consumer effect than 150%. Now, this is where the difference comes into how you play. By default, your combo of essentially just, you know, Ash Blasting and Overheat is good enough for trash. But if you want to start taking on captains, elites, and more powerful enemies, it's impossible that you put a couple of shots into them with the volcanic rounds that's on your weapon to actually set them on fire, so that when you then Ash Blast and Overheat, you are consuming the fire on them as well, the burn on them. I keep saying fire, but you guys know what I'm saying. You consume the burn on them and the ash, and that'll actually make the overheat heat harder. So then on the gloves themselves, we have an increase in range to Ash Blast, which is quite important. We also have Sunburn on here, which increases a certain percentage of damage done to enemies that have their statuses consumed. And then last but not least, on the boots, we have Captain Hunter, because we want to be dealing more damage against captains, you know, elites and bosses. Trash is no problem. And we have Bullet Kindling on here, which makes us deal more damage against enemies that are on fire, which again you have to capitalize on by shooting stuff with volcanic rounds. Now, when we go over to the skills itself, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We, of course, we have volcanic rounds. Volcanic rounds is the way how we engage our reload boost, but at the same time, it's also the way in which we set things on fire. Note that you can also melee and set things on fire. So if you are looking to fight something and your volcanic round is on cooldown or something like that, and you quickly want to set it on fire because it's a tough target, you can actually AoE melee around it, or just melee it straight in the face, and that'll also set it on fire. Ash Blast and Overheat is the main combo, and so you'll see super low cooldowns here, which was also for the first build, you know, something that was very important. And of course, Ash Blast is how you immobilize enemies, and then you consume those statuses with Overheat, and that deals a whole bunch of damage to them. Now again, the class tree is the same class tree that we had back in the day, so I'm just sort of fast covering these things. Of course, if you guys want to see the original build, you can refer to Speedrun Pyro on the channel. But we are going top here to capitalize on all this additional damage to enemies that are afflicted by Ash. We also pick up Hot Situation, which just gives us a crap load of anomaly power every time that we use Ash Blast. And then we go all the way near the end. We don't pick up the capstone because we don't need the weapon damage there, but we do pick up the additional damage to Ash all the way at the end here, and we absolutely get ourselves some more cooldown reduction there. Last but not least, that leaves us with essentially 5 points left, which we can dip down at the bottom here and pick up Wildfire, which gives us just that much more cooldown reduction, which is really what drives the engine of this build in a way. I'll just bring my face back quickly. Now, of course, in original vanilla Outriders, we didn't have the PAX tree, so this was quite interesting for me, thinking which PAX choices would work the best for this. In the end, what I opted for was taking Melting Point, which increases our resistance piercing, and basically this is gated on whether how tough the enemy is. Is it above 80% life, or is it below 40? Generally we aren't capitalizing from resistance piercing and armor piercing, and, you know, no resistance against the fortified or anything like that. So this isn't really benefiting us all that much as it could if you were to bring those two into it, but that's something that I'm looking at for the Worldslayer version of this build. Then of course we're using Master Exploder, which again just dips into resistance piercing essentially every time that we use Overheat. We are using Convection because this is obviously, we have to take it to progress on further, and just it's another way for us to get our cooldowns down. And then what I do is I go into Conduction for another 15% cooldown reduction, and I pick up Backdraft, which actually increases my anomaly power by 25% for every skill on cooldown. The thought here being that we can really capitalize on powerful overheats here, because we go volcanic rounds, we shoot once, twice, set something on fire, reload off that goes on to cooldown, we Ash Blast, now 2 skills on cooldown, and we have a powerful overheat. Then last but certainly not least, on the Ascension tree, essentially you just want to be putting as much of your points, your first 50 even if you want to. You could put them all into anomaly, but definitely your first 10 into anomaly damage, your next 10 into anomaly power. You might at that point, if you're struggling with cooldown reduction, you might want to go for cooldown reduction here. But essentially this is just a way for you to accentuate the damage profile of the build. If you are doing these massive clears and you're on super low cooldown, you should have no problem with maintaining a good health profile, and your survivability should be decent. But if for some reason that is suffering, then of course you can know. Yeah, now I'm of course giving the advice here as if you are going to build this build, but again, this is the old speedrun pyro, and of course this advice that I'm giving rather holds true to whether you want to actually bring up a Worldslayer version of the build using the same mods that I have on there, but then adding 5 more mods onto it like I'm doing and like I'm bringing to the channel in a couple of days. And that's it for the video on the build. Not really a new build today per se, but rather just a test for us to see if speedrun pyro is still as badass as it used to be. And now of course I will bring the Worldslayer version of the build in the next couple of days. Let me know in the comments down below which 5 mods you think would be the game changers in bringing speedrun pyro into, you know, the new century, into Worldslayer. I kind of already have the build figured out. I'm looking for one more perfect piece and then we're going to be good to go. But I'm super excited for this. Again, this is a build that I enjoyed so much playing in the past, and I'm just super excited to bring it back onto my Pyromancer and do a couple of runs solo as well as with buddies on Thursday nights. Shout out to the stream. We are back this Thursday again, streaming Outriders with the community. We do some runs together, we have some beers together, and we hang out. So definitely put that in your calendars, and I hope I see you soon. But thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.